And it was a novelty.
One of the
It's convenient, that's for sure.
That's about it. I don't use it often.
No.
Yeah, it's not that big a deal.
A couple years ago, I said, you should start these young dudes because he's
Apart from that,
you better respect.
well, anyway, I'll talk to you later. Nice to see you.
Hot right now, you take advantage of it, so.
Yeah, actually, yeah, you don't
Well,
have
that's a story in itself.
Yeah, they would show up.
One day we can talk about that stuff.
Oh. So just so to remind you all,
The short answer to your question is yes.
we're on,
But there's
we're being
the-
webcast, so the camera is on.
In the past. Now, would I be interested in the future? Perhaps. I have to reach probably up
SPC
48.
is the.
I probably have to.
Yeah.
What's it used?
Because the retirement bill, as you know, what the
These microphones
retirement
click or
You need ID.
I missed the wave of youth.
Seems unnecessary.
So now it's only the shorter span retirement that we have.
Was user SPC gas is the user, and then state farm.
Yeah, to make it,
SPC.
yeah, to be, the only way it would make sense for me.
Yeah, no, that sounds right. This is called
I would take the risk of that across my business. And just keep collecting my
Trying.
where I'm at now. And then maybe that's something I do in my last 10 years.
Yes, success.
That would be the
Yep.
same way.
So,
Unlike James, I missed the youthful, easy 20-year retirement.
subject to final.
Just get fired. Thank you.
Oh, you are, oh, yeah, that's important. We're back.
I said you had to make it by the time you're like, 45 to get that. And you're 37. Wait, there we go.
Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah.
Sorry, all right. No,
Just
it's okay.
checking whether it is.
I'll forget yours, huh?
Thank you.
Coffee, coffee, coffee. Hey, how are you?
Probably, but, I have a box.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Okay. Do you want to fly?
Not drive.
Oh, yeah, I guess.
Never fly from San Diego.
You tell them.
Only the really wealthy
You
people
can
do
tell
that. You might train up.
Excuse me.
It's a hot coffee, I think I'll let you pass.
It's freezing cold water and boiling hot.
Oh, okay.
So both are not dry.
Yes.
I was good.
Are you staying with your?
No, I'm going straight back.
Welcome to reservation. Thank you. If you are the leader, please enter your leader
No.
to start or join your conference. You will now be placed in conference. To mute your line, press *6.
Myself
Sounds like sounds like, oh yeah, it's gonna take their airlines. That's the phone.
Your call cannot be completed in silence.
It's annoying.
Yeah, wait, I think I
Your
did just
call
now.
cannot be completed.
Like here,
Florida, I mean,
yeah.
that's the phone they would,
That always sounds so nice.
Your call cannot be
Yeah,
Voice comes, yo, fool, you dialing wrong. Can't dial, fool.
Maybe you should become the, like, you do a career that voice is fun.
Like Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I was surprised, because I was like, well, I'm really not here, because I was really thinking like,
To start
I'd
a
get
joint
before, and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna like roll up the bed, I'm sure if I get there half hour before, it's fine, and when I got there, I was like, oh, I'm glad I left myself a little bit of a cushion.
Well, that's what citizens do. Nobody's watching, it shouldn't be a problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, that's
Thanks, thanks.
That's like a quarter before. Like a cow.
Always nice.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So by that one, sure. We'll keep dancing.
Yeah.
All right.
And the webcast has started, so people are watching us. You can chat.
The telephone.
I can hear you, but I'm not sure how.
Oh, I turned it down.
I think it's, this cord is like, I was having a fight.
I don't think I'm not getting power either.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not the cord.
Oh, there's an on-off switch here, I think. Yes.
All right.
Yes. Thank you for finding
All right, can
that. That helped
everybody
me
please have a
too.
seat? I want to remind everybody that we are being webcast, so that members of the public or anyone else can see what we're doing and saying, so keep that in mind, please. I think we're ready to go. All right, so I'm gonna do, yeah. I'm gonna do the roll call, okay? Right? Okay. Highland, Chen. Jason Lee.
Here.
Martin Armstrong. Ruthie Ashley.
Here.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. The Honorable Diane Becton.
As in,
Connie Broussard. Lori Charrington. Leslie Cunningham. Me. Anita Glover.
Good morning.
Kelly Greer.
Good morning.
Morning. The Honorable Brent, it says Brenda. Brenda Hartley Forte. Brenda, yeah. Brenda. Brenda is, okay. Melissa Hung.
Hi there.
Genevieve, I'm always working on her name. Genevieve Jones Wright. No? Catalina Lozano. Esther Kim.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Tricia Maloof. Marvin Mizell.
Here.
Angela O. Here. Emily Quinlan.
Right here.
Renee Reyes.
Present.
Gary Roberts.
Morning.
Donna Schule,
Here.
Mark Shem,
Sorry, the bells was.
Barry Weissman,
Yo.
Deanna Williams, Sandra Yamate, Rodney Fong,
Here.
Tricia Lee, Milton Knowles.
Here.
Oh. Okay, good, thank you. All right, Dinah, you want to start off the meeting? Dinah? Excuse me, District Attorney. Attorney Beckton, are you there? Are you on mute? Are you on mute? Are the people ready? We can't hear you. Yeah, are the people ready?
She's probably getting some strawberries.
She probably, she's got a jury someplace. I don't know. All right. Okay. Ruthie's up.
I'm still on.
Yeah, okay, okay.
I'm going to be on mute until you need me, so I'm going to be on mute as I walk along the beach.
Get off the phone. Yeah, we did. No, we just said if you.
85 degrees is not cutting here. Did you call my name a second time?
Yeah. We just
Oh,
wanted.
I'm sorry. I thought I had answered once, but I'm here.
Oh, no. We wanted, I just was asking whether you had any remarks you wanted to start off the meeting with.
Oh, no, I don't.
Okay, and I just want to remind everybody to, when you want to speak, to please turn on your microphone, and when you stop speaking, please turn it off so you don't get extraneous sounds on the record. All right? Are there any members of the public on the line or in the room? I don't see any in the room. Okay. Oh, no, this, there's Highland, there she is. I see, I didn't mark you as not here. There you go. All right, so I wanted to introduce our Board of Trustees liaisons. And one of them is an old friend, Jason Lee. And there we have a new friend, Highland Chen. Who was just joined the BOT as the latest appointment from the Supreme Court. Highland, you want to give a little bit of your background?
Sure. I am a litigation partner at Munger.
Oh, microphone.
Yes.
No, I think the microphone's good.
I'm Highland Chen. I am a litigation partner at Munger, Tolson, Olson here in Los Angeles. As Judge Fujii just said, I'm a very recent appointment to the board. I think I've been to 2 board meetings now. And Jason is showing me the ropes. Diversity and inclusion is one of my passions in access to justice. So I am very excited to learn about the work of COA and to serve as a liaison.
Have left the conference.
Uh-oh. Okay, ready? Soon she will come back on. Jason, you want to say hello?
Oh, sure. So Jason Lee, I am the Vice President of the State Bar and a long-time supporter of COAF. But there was a time when I was on your council for about 5 minutes before the Supreme Court appointed me to the Board of Trustees, and I've been closely tracking you all into this, and I could attend your meetings and been a big proponent of your work. Let me just say, I'm going to read our State Bar mission. The State Bar of California's mission is to protect the public and includes the primary functions of licensing, regulation, and discipline of attorneys, the advancement of ethical and competent practice of law, and support of efforts for greater access to and inclusion in the legal system. Now, that last phrase is 3 years in the making. There was a significant effort to include those 2 components into our mission, and now it's here. And I'm here, and the board is here to support your efforts to ensure that that mission is proliferated throughout our institution and throughout our state. People talk about public protection now, and we need to remind them that public protection is not only part of regulation of our profession, but also proliferating the ideas of access to justice and inclusion. So with that, I'm happily here and supportive of all your work, so thank you very much.
And I just wanted to say that COAP is really appreciative of the work that Jason's been doing. You talk about the last few years, that's what has been one of Jason's primary accomplishments on the board, is to spearhead the movement to include inclusion and diversity in the mission statement of the State Bar, and it has made us an established part of the State Bar, as opposed to the part that has been spun off into what's going to be the California Lawyers Association. So we really appreciate your effort to ask questions. Dinah. Dinah? Oh, she left, she didn't come back. She did not know she's not there.
She couldn't get a signal on the beach.
Ruthie's on the
We don't know
boat.
where Dinah is.
I know, Dinah's in her car or something.
I'm on the line.
Oh, no, Ruthie's on the boat. Yes, right. We just lost Dinah. Yeah.
I am hearing everything you say, but I'm hearing.
Oh, right. So, all right. So, until we hear from Dinah, I'm going to proceed with the chair's report. We have our 2018 budget and our EOB revenue sources. Please take a look at the attachments that we have to the agenda, the draft fee statement, and the Affinity Bar support letter. Right now, we are still not sure whether we are going to be going, I'm sorry. Oh, update from Donna Hurst. Oh, where's Donna? Oh, there you are. Focus here. Right, so we've been talking a lot about what's going on in terms of the due statement and whether it was going to be an opt-in or opt-out, and so we have a report from Donna Herskowitz.
Thank you, JPJ. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Donna Herskowitz. I normally have a slightly higher pitched voice than this, but I have a cold, so my apologies. I wanted to give you an update on where we stand on the fee statement and the elimination of bias fee in particular. The State Bar has been doing an analysis, a legal analysis of the question of whether we could return to an opt-out or we needed to stay with the opt-in with the voluntary donation that we did last year. And because that analysis was ongoing, the item that was presented to the Board of Trustees in November continued it as an opt-in with a voluntary donation amount suggested $10. The draft fee statement that you have in your materials references that opt-in. As we have proceeded with the legal research on that, we will be presenting to the board for their consideration in December, switching back to an opt-out. And the amount that would be recommended for that opt-out is $2. In the past, it's been $5, but it was for elimination of bias as well as bar relations funding. And the Office of Bar Relations is no longer with the State Bar, and so the funding needed to be split to match the funding for the elimination of supporting the elimination of bias. And so that's why the budgetary analysis of that is $2. So that is an item that will be up for discussion and consideration at the board's December 1 meeting. Typically, we like to send the fee statement out to our licensees on December 1st, but we anticipate a delay as a result of the board having to take the opportunity, being given the opportunity to reconsider the opt-in and to change it to an opt-out. And then there's a variety of programming that needs to be done to update the state bar, my state bar profile page, to update the fee statement, to update a variety of aspects with the billing, the agency billing systems, we are doing the online billing. So that could delay the statements going out. The end result, and I apologize, I haven't done a precise math, but if the board were to elect to go with the opt-out at $2, roughly, I think about $400,000, that would be in for elimination of bias programs in particular. So, although you do have, as I said, the draft statement in front of you, which shows it as an opt-in, the board will be considering looking at that as an opt-out on their December 1 meeting.
And just a little explanation, I know many of you have heard this a million times before, but the opt-in means that you say, all right, how many of you want to donate a certain amount to the elimination of bias programs, and it requires an affirmative action, don't want to say that, an action of actually checking off that box. And the difficulty is that for a lot of organizations, you have large organizations that have a lot of lawyers. And so they just, the automatic, they're not going to automatically check that off. And the lawyers don't ever see the statements. And so they don't have the opportunity themselves to say, yes, I want to support this. So it requires sort of a large public relations outreach to these groups to try to get them all to do this. For large law firms, for DA's office, public organizations, it's very, very tough. And whereas with an opt-out, which is what we're trying to get, you would have to say, no, I don't want this to go out, to go to these programs. And that does allow anybody who says, I don't support this, I don't want this to be paid for, to say, I'm not going to pay for that outreach. But it makes it less of an affirmative act and more of something where people say, well, okay, I'll go ahead and let this get paid. So that's why it's been a very big thing for us to try to get that, and we've been doing, and everybody's been doing a lot of lobbying. We've been talking a lot to members of the DOT and such like to try to get that in, because it does make a big difference in terms of the funds that would be available for our programs. Oh yes, please do this.
Thanks. Well, I'd like to say first, thank you to Newton and others in the Office of General Counsel for accelerating the review. If everyone remembers what happened last year when our fee bill was not approved, the Board of Trustees didn't really have the authority to do an opt-out. So we reverted to the default, which was this process. And with new leadership, they really took the time to research whether we had the authority, the institution itself had the authority to do an opt-out and revert to this process, which would mean really a windfall of funding for COASH and the AOB efforts of the bar. So with Donna's help, Maria and the OGC, and I know I emailed directly to Vanessa to check on the status of the review, so thank you very much.
Donna, or Holly, this is Ruby.
Hi.
Can I first of all say thank you to Donna and Leah, but Donna, since I talked to you about this, and say I'm delighted that the meeting is towards the opt-out. My question is, and I'm sure you did a business calculation on what the costs were, why was it not split right down the middle for $250 each, since it was $5 for the entire bar relations and COAS? COAS has an advisory council, whereas bar relations did not, and COAS has a lot of active programs. So I'm wondering why or how we came to that number of $2. I would actually give them a $3.50 or $4, but that's my personal bias. But do you have any comments on that? Why we don't split it at least halfway down to $2.50 each or higher?
So this is Donna. As I understand it, and Newton may have some additional information on this, but as I understand it, what we are required to do is actually do the fiscal analysis of the costs that are allocated between, or the costs that were allocated between bar relations and elimination of bias, to divide the fund, how the funding was split. And so what you look at now is sort of the elimination of bias. I see Newton has lit his microphone, so he can specific information on that. I'm going to defer.
Hi, good morning, Ruthie. This is Newton. I just wanted to let you know that we also, the executive director has asked OGC to review COAP's work plan to determine the chargeability of each of its initiatives. And with the new State Bar Commission, what we're trying to accomplish is have more integration with diversity work. And part of that is getting more of the initiatives of COAP funded under the general fund. So what we've been doing is going through COAP's tasks and initiatives and strategic goals to see which of these items can be funded from the general fund. And what we're looking at is our legal framework, which is the Keller decision from the U.S. Supreme Court, and our Rosser House decision, which ultimately ended in the Superior Court Sacramento. And they pretty much set out the legal requirements for what can be generally funded from mandatory fees based on what's germane to the legal profession. And part of our work in OGC has been going through all the plans and all the goals of COAP to see what fits into that definition, and also keeping in mind what the new state law mission is and how we can sort of get the two to be in harmony. The case law is pretty old, so we're trying to be sort of open-minded in how we interpret the tasks and goals of COAP, but we're also limited, especially by the Supreme Court decision in Keller, and which is further limited by Rosser House. So we're trying to sort of reason our way through those two cases and what our new state bar mission includes.
And so this is Donna again.
Thank you, Newton, and thank you, Newton. And I do agree we need to stay within Keller and Rosser House. I think though, Pat, you can, Pat and Ron both were here at that time when Star Babcock and his staff were here. I think that Keller was in place when we started the opt-out function, and in the at least decade that it's been in place, there hasn't been any pushback on that. So hopefully you've looked at, I know you have, what Star, you as general counsel, looked at and came to those conclusions. Because I really, and I do hear you that you're trying to find areas of COAP that will be covered by the general fund, which means that the $400,000 projected for COAP at this point in time would cover everything that we're doing now, and perhaps some of the projects that you will, or some of the areas of diversity and inclusion that will go out to other areas would be covered not by the $400,000, but by the general fund revenue. I'm asking this because last year when we did the opt-in, the funding for diversity and inclusion dropped greatly. And for Pat and I, who have been in this, well, Holly was there at the beginning too, but for Pat and I and Ron and Holly, who have been doing this, and Brenda, I forgot you were the word Brenda, I'm the first chair of COAP. We know how much this council has grown in the decade that it has been in place, and that has gone beyond our wildest dreams to do the kind of work that it does. And anything that we can do, and I know you're on this page with us, and I know Donna is too, anything that we can do to retain the funding at the same level, at least at a minimum, would be something that I think is important for the state department to cover protection focus for diversity and inclusion.
So I think that's a really good lead-in.
So thank you for continuing to do that.
It's a really good lead-in, Judge, to the next topic, built in, not bolted on, the state board diversity agenda, if you wanted me to go into that.
I was thinking of that, but I think we're supposed to hear from Ron Fogg first, all right, on the budget process.
There's one other piece on the budget. There's one other piece of the budget that I just wanted to share with the council, is that as we look at budgeting now, it's not necessarily, oh, if you did it before, you'll automatically get it again. What we're doing as part of the new bar is looking at everything that we're doing and also making sure that we evaluate it. In other words, if we say we're going to do this project, what are our outcome measures? and are we hitting those targets? So I just want to raise that with the council. We're raising it with all of our sub-entities, is that we really need to be cognizant of the need to measure our outputs and be able to define our work plans with some outputs and output measures. And we realize that that transition is not going to be right away and automatic to do, but we just want you thinking that way so that we can at least, again, show folks we are spending our money, our funding in a very judicious way, and that we are able to show that it's achieving what we're trying to show.
And just, this is Pat, just following up on that, you noticed in the strategic plan for each initiative, we have made attempts to know what the impact is and how the impact will be measured. So as you're in your committee meetings and you're going through the initiative, deciding which ones will continue, which ones will be modified, which ones will be deleted, and so forth, look at those outcome statements to see if they make sense, to see if we will be able to document it in a way it's described. If not, we need to modify those so that we can't show what we've accomplished as part of the budget process.
Thank you, and have gotten away, yes.
I was waiting to confirm the issue of, I guess, State Bar staff time, allocating their time for obviously protection, diversity efforts, because this issue came up. Perhaps it's moot now because of this new structure and the new mission of the State Bar, but when we spoke with Rebecca from Communications, I know she was very cognizant of how she had to only allocate very limited time for diversity because of the mission, and so can you just clarify if that's what the case outside going to work out when we have to work with other, I know we're working with you directly now, but it's going to be kind of a, I guess, easier process for us where we feel like COAF is obviously a priority?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I mean, as Jason, read the mission statement, I think it's pretty clear that diversity and inclusion is a priority of the State Bar, and we're getting that message all throughout the State Bar. So I wouldn't worry about it. And the fact that, we just talked about the funding and the out portion, hopefully that comes out. I think it shows that diversity is definitely not an afterthought of the State Bar. It is definitely one of the major tenets of public protection.
All right, so that moves us smoothly into the next portion of our agenda, the preview of the State Bar diversity agenda from Don Hershkowitz, talking about the built-in, not bolted-on concept.
So this is a very good follow-on from what you were just raising. I think it sort of by design, with COAF and PAC being the bar's diversity people, there may have been the sense of, diversity and inclusion issues were not anybody else's responsibility. COAF does it, handles it and tackles it very well. PAC, who can say anything negative about PAC and everything that PAC does? So it was covered, and that doesn't make any sense, right? So one of the things that Leah Wilson, our executive director, has really been spending a lot of time thinking about is a way to integrate diversity and inclusion work throughout the bar and not have it solely focused in the good works of COAF and PAC. And so she is working through the notion of an agenda that she refers to as built-in, not bolted on. She admits stealing this from a family friend, that title, but it really seems to work very well. And the idea is that there can be efforts throughout the bar, and this is true regardless of funding source, whether we do it as an opt-in or we do it as an opt-out. There are opportunities for every area of the bar to be involved in diversity and inclusion activities. So whether that is training, attorneys on diversity and implicit bias, training state bar staff on diversity and implicit bias. Maybe it's a research agenda that looks at the attorney discipline system and whether there is disproportionality in the prosecution and levels of discipline. Looking at grant distribution, who's being served by the legal services dollars that the bar is distributing. Are all of the strategic initiatives that COAF is undertaking realizing the intended results? Further training and outreach to encourage diverse candidates to apply for and run for the bench successfully. Looking within the bar at hiring and promotions and board and committee compositions, development and implementation and ongoing monitoring of procurement guidelines, right? There are varieties of things that we can and should be doing throughout the bar to really better integrate it in the work of everything that the bar is doing and the thought process of all of us at the bar, and not relegate the responsibility of this very important part of our mission to COAF and PAT. This ties very directly in with what Newton was saying. We need to finalize the analysis of which parts of the diversity work in COAF's agenda can be funded through the general fund. But the goal here is that through, at the very least, the in-kind resources, the staff resources, for example, on this research agenda, that we would be able to provide greater support in terms of resources to the diversity and inclusion agenda than we have been, regardless of if we're using an opt-in or an opt-out funding structure, and that it really does become part and parcel of everything the bar does. Right? We talked very clearly about the public protection mission of the bar, which is incredibly important, as is diversity and inclusion. And this would keep that at the tops of the minds of everybody throughout the bar. And so that's a direction that we're hoping to be able to head into, better integrate this throughout the bar. And how we do that and how we structure sort of funding of COAF initiatives versus other pieces of this agenda depends on the ultimate conclusion of the research that you was talking about.
All right, any questions about it? What I did was I made a copy of a list of all the state bar departments, just so you can see and begin thinking about kinds of projects that they might do that would relate to diversity and inclusion, even though it might not be definitely a part of the COAF initiative, but what these various departments can do in relation to diversity and inclusion, kind of what Donna was describing some examples. So the more we can think of that and the more that these departments can undertake that activity, then that could all come out of general fund.
This is Brenda. I think it's excellent to kind of incorporate these issues into the entire state bar and the work of the state bar. I trust that it won't be so successful for them, but then say, well, we don't need COAF. So I want to ensure that
all racism and sexism, all of the forms.
Yeah, you know, now it's institutional.
And happily so.
Yeah, now it's institutionalized of the concept, and everybody else, all the other departments are percolating right along, so like we need COAF. But COAF will continue to be the think tank for diversity issues and everything.
There has been no discussion to the contrary.
Yeah, okay, all right, we don't want to plan our own obsolescence. All right, thank you.
And then on the related notes earlier raised again about separation of the sections, Office of Education, and ZOLA. We've worked with them in the past, obviously, to promote diversity and inclusion in their committees, work with their staff in terms of like distributing. So a couple questions. As far as logistics of how the section staff will be, are they going to be housed in the same state bar offices? And second, how is that going to be as far as us communicating, working, continuing to work with these sections once they're kind of officially separated from the state bar?
So one of the, or a couple of the items that the board will be seeing at its December 1st meeting involve the separation of the sections and the final MOU with the sections. The discussion that has been going on with the sections involves a borrowing back, if you will, of the staff for a defined period of time. So the staff that has been working with the sections would continue to be supporting the sections. The section will be sort of paying for those staff costs as well as the space that the staff occupies in the state bar offices. I don't have information about what the plan is for at the expiration of that term, if they will be hiring all new staff, if they'll be moving to a different location, or if it's a longer term lease of space within the bar. So I don't have the specific information on that, but certainly for the first at least 6 months of the transition, we are talking about the same staff that had been supporting the sections would continue to be supporting the sections, and that they'd be working at the bar, and we would be. I'm trying to think of words that don't say that I'm leasing back to staff, but that the sections would be covering the costs of the staff and the facilities.
Anything else?
So I think that the idea of the built-in is a good one, and but to address the comment of the idea that co-op would cease to exist, certainly not under my watch. There is not a level of concentrated expertise and leadership in this area. For many years, all of you have been working to promote diversity and inclusion. There's no one else at the state bar that has that kind of experience. So I think there's an opportunity for COAF to really take a leadership position, not only as you have in the community, but also now with the institution. So I really look forward to seeing the sort of the end results of where we can come out with funding and where we can utilize our resources.
And when Jason's done with his leadership, and we have Helen coming up, so I'm sure we're going to have a lot of support from DOT. A lot of what we've been talking about so far has been funding, and what it is that this council can do with the funds we have and what funds might be available. And so that goes seamlessly into the next section of our agenda on fundraising strategies. And Barry Weissman, our fundraising chair, is going to be discussing how it is we're going to be raising money to do all the things that we're going to be talking about today. Barry.
Thank you, I think.
Yeah.
You should all have in your packet, one of the initial things we want to discuss is a draft letter that we plan to send out. You'll see that this letter is different than the past letters. We've shortened it and just trying.
Some of the extra pieces of it.
Oh.
Barry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, is that any better?
Better.
Okay, I probably wasn't talking when you said that, Ruby, but okay. But besides the letter, I'm hoping when we have our committee meeting, we discuss some other types of things we want to do. I know I had tried to get tickets to Hamilton, so that, hi Catalina, perfect timing. And Catalina is the co-chair of this group as well. And was completely unsuccessful on trying to get tickets for Hamilton here in Los Angeles and be able to auction them off somehow. It fizzled. I did try, I had some contacts to go directly to Manuel Miranda, and he just wasn't interested in getting involved in this at all. So we're still investigating what we can do. We had talked about having the Supreme Court judge come down and talk to us. We would maybe do two things. Ruthie, you were going to check for some dates, as I recall, at our last meeting, or 2 meetings ago, because I wasn't at the last one, to have her come down to, if she was going to be in Los Angeles, do something here, and then do something up in San Francisco or Northern California, hopefully with her as well, or with somebody else, to try to get people to come in. And we were going to have the space donated. We were talking about using schools. I think Southwestern was one of the schools we talked about down here, and then probably Hastings in Northern California. Unfortunately, I don't know where that stands at this point. But we can discuss that more in the committee meeting. But what I'd like to try to do is have everybody take a look at this letter. The draft. Yes, Judge?
Oh no, Well,
I saw you
know
leaning
my
toward the
kids are
mic.
so expressive. I sent an email to Pat about this, about the language in the letter where it starts off the second paragraph. Unfortunately, the number of minorities entering our profession has actually decreased over the last decade. And that's how long we've been in operation. It sounds a little bit like, well, we came on the scene and the number of minorities just plummeted. and recognizing that, you know, to my mind, I think a lot of what's happened is that minorities, like other people, I mean, generally speaking, applications for law schools are way, way down.
Right.
That they no longer see this as a path to success. They don't see law as the place you go to and you're going to get a job, you're going to be respectable, you're going to make a lot of money, and people feel like there are other ways to do that are less difficult than getting into and going to law school. And so I think we have to be careful about that. I was just concerned about that paragraph, and perhaps to work to that effect. You could even say, unfortunately, due to the recession and other changes in the profession, the number of minorities are reduced, and the co-op has to work even harder than ever to increase diversity in the profession. So
that's exactly what I was trying to get at, was that point, was that we need to work harder, and given what's happening, lack of funding from the bar itself, we need their help more. But I'll reword it.
Right. Yeah, that first part just
yeah, we can
sounded
reword it so that it imparts it better.
Thank you.
Imparts that. One of the big issues in the letter that we do need everybody's help is the examples. Because what we want to be able to do is, one, is shorten the letter from the prior letters, and I've actually taken the liberty of submitting this to our PR people in the firm who specialize in writing these types of things. And they've written, well, they've edited what we had initially and even made it shorter than what we had. But we need to be able to put in here at least 2 examples of each one of these points. For the academies, the 2+2+3, the mentoring issue. So if you have ideas or you can give us some thoughts, please. And I think there was a discussion of whether we actually use the names of the people that we're using for the examples, or just use the example of what happened. I personally prefer the idea of just saying what happened and why it worked so well without the names. But I know that there is a difference of opinion on that, so.
You might want to try it both ways, because there is sort of just say, one law student did such and such, and you go, okay, that doesn't sound terribly compelling. You would say, so-and-so who was, who came from a family of where nobody had ever graduated from high school, was able to do this and this and this. I think that could be very powerful, keeping in mind that, yeah, a short letter is good.
Yeah, and we'll have to go back to the individuals and make sure they're okay with us using their names and full descriptions. But if somebody, please, as many examples as you can give, and then we can make the selection of what we want to do. But I want to try to hold it to at least 2 so that we keep it brief.
Ruthie, do you have any ideas that you might be able to give to Barry of specific examples of people who benefited from our programs?
Well, yes, I do. Talking about starting way young, and that's actually COAF and the California Law Academies are a direct result of COAF and the work that it's done. So this year, our very first class from our law academies that started in the fall of 2011 are graduating from college. And some of you know I taught at the high school in the law academy for 1 year. And I just wrote 3 recommendations to LSAC for 3 of those law grads, college grads who are entering into law school. And all 3 of them will be the first to enter a postgraduate, some of them first to go to college, And all three of them, in fact, one has a really heartbreaking story of a single mom and a father who was murdered, and a single mom who raised all 5 children. And she has been applying to law school. So this is just an example of one thing, one program that COAF has supported. And if we go to the 6 law academies that we started, and now to the 20 that we have in place, and 2 more that will be starting, I think we'll see a flood of people coming through. And these graduates will become lawyers, will be a prime area for us to do funding, Mary, when they become our alumni. And I think we look at alumni also of COAF, who have been here, who have been involved in work, who are committed to the work, and go back to them and see if you can get either the same funding on an annual basis. Look at the law firms that have been involved too. So we have some alumni coming up, and I think we go to our alumni for COAF too.
Ruthie, can you give me the details about what's going on, especially with that one law student who has one student who has that horrible, but ultimately uplifting story to tell. Especially, I would imagine by the time we get this off the ground, it may very well be that person will have gotten into law school, and so you can have sort of the next step on there.
Well, I think given...
Yeah, and I'm sure our other law academies, like Crawford, who was one of our original class chief, another original law school, Warren High School, another original law academy, not law school, law academy, will all have similar stories of graduates who are now seniors and applying for law school. So I can talk to all those. I can send out an email to all of our law academies to find out what stories they got out there.
Right. And maybe also we'll talk to Laura about stories she may be aware of.
The other point I was going to make quickly, following up on your comment, this is kind of pressing to get this out as soon as we can. The letter needs to really go out quickly in order to try to get the funds in as fast as possible, since we don't know how much we can get and we do need it. But again,
Maybe with that letter, we get some testimonials from some of our law academy students.
okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, why don't you two talk then?
Yeah.
Yes.
I know the California Bar Foundation routinely sends out these solicitations, and so I think as far as examples of fundraising diversity, and I know their goal was primarily for scholarships of diverse students, but I think that's another good example. Looking at the website right now, and they have a lot of testimonials.
And maybe one of our contacts with CBF these days, I know Sonia is very supportive, and they have less of a pressure on terms of its fundraising now because of the sources that have been switched over to them, so perhaps they can help us with that.
What is the ideal date that you want to send the letter out? What would be your deadline?
About a month ago.
Probably to coincide with the sending out of the fee statement, because there are those opportunities there, and then there's additional opportunities where they're trying to put a URL to the voluntary contribution button that shows up on the State Bar website. So we want all that to coincide, so when they get that, they have all these options for donating.
I will speak with Bakersfield College's pre-law program. I'm in contact with the advisor, and I serve on that committee, so I can get some of the students to provide you with statements, and then you can choose from those options.
What I suggest is Pat, if it's okay, we funnel everything through you, and then you can get it to me, and then we'll work on the committee with Catalina for sure, and anybody else that's willing to work with us on it, and then I'll take the final draft at that point, and I'll send it back to our PR people to give it more of a punch.
Are we looking at an electronic letter, something that would go out in an email where you just click on something and donate?
Yes.
Having to get out your pen and write it.
Yeah, no, that's
Nobody does anymore?
That's the hope, exactly, is to do it that way, and that's the whole idea of the URL, so it's as simple as possible. It'll be hyperlinked, and you just go, yes.
Although we did get approval from the Bar Foundation for any, like sometimes law firms like to send a check so that they've agreed to receive all the checks on our behalf, processed any given this, because they have a tax ID, they're nonprofit, they
Right.
deduct. Go get bar.
which is going to be crucial for firms, and maybe even some individuals will want the deduction, since we're losing a lot of our deductions next year.
Angela?
Can I suggest that, that you consider, when you present this, to look at our past accomplishments, and you can, do that in our current work, and our future projects that we have in mind, so that it's not just a list of, gee, look at what we do, but look, our track record, what we're doing now, and we're thinking about, what we're going to be doing next, because the whole area is shifting right now.
Right.
So that might be a nice way, and also
Yeah.
color, if it's possible. Is it possible?
The email to be in color?
Yeah.
I would think so,
color?
yeah,
Yeah,
usually you
okay.
can, but it depends on what system the recipient gets it. If you aren't getting it in HTML, it's black and white, and it's just gonna be text. But if you're using the HTTP, then you'll see it all in color. So from us, it'll originate that way. It just depends on the recipient.
Donna, you have something to comment?
Yeah, as somebody kind of just reading this, kind of cold, a reaction that I had to it was that it's a lot of words and a lot of explanation, and it didn't keep me reading because of that. But when I go into each of your paragraphs, for example, on the high school law academies, the last sentence, we have 22 academies statewide supported by 1,200 attorneys, judges. That's the punch on it, not so much the explanation of what a high school law academy is and how it started. And so I'm kind of torn on this, because on the one hand, somebody might go, okay, great, but I don't know what this is. On the other hand, the punch, that last sentence, is the most impactful of it. So I'm wondering how you could, get that punch in there, and then maybe provide the explanation somewhere later in the letter, where if somebody wants to continue reading, they can, but if the punch is enough, they would donate.
Or maybe a link?
Or a link.
Put links into it,
Yeah.
so you can see. That's actually a great idea.
And if you, for example, if the punches were enough, sort of punch of the achievements on these programs, and a donate button, and then explanations or links below for people that aren't convinced yet.
Okay.
And see if that rearranging of it
Most of
works.
the information that we've read on these types of letters and how to structure them, most of them, in fact, I think all of them, I've read about a dozen of them, they all have like little explanations and examples. It's the examples that are the real punch. But the wording of the paragraph, I mean, with what you're talking about, if we just rearrange, I can rearrange that easily, put the last sentence first, reword it a little bit, and grab them, then a little explanation, then the website, the link to it. I think that would be a great way to do it.
That might be.
And the examples. You
Yeah.
still have the examples in the letter, because that apparently, according to people that do this as a profession, that's what grabs people so that they donate.
Well, and I think that as lawyers, we're used to structuring it where we have the punchline at the end, right? That we, go from da-da-da-da, and then conclusion, right?
Actually,
and
no, I put it right in the beginning.
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
that.
the beginning first.
Yeah, especially judges.
Yeah.
That they want
Stop
to.
reading.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
That one actually could be 2 lines.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
There could be
what
2
we-
lines.
That's the type of help I'm looking for.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think Bill and I together, we can
Yeah.
just a rewrite. I think it could
Great.
be put in 2 lines.
Do as many rewrites, and that's why this says draft.
2 lines.
I'm looking for help to get as much punch as we can possibly get. And this is a reduction of, I think, the last one was 4 pages. So as short as we can get it, as punchy as we can get it. That's the goal here.
Well, it looks like you got some good help that you're gonna be getting to get
Yeah.
us some final form. All right, thank you very much, Barry. All right, so now Rod, you gave us a little sort of a taste of what was going on in terms of the separation of the sections. Could you give us more information about the reorganization, the new program committee, and the governance task force of UT?
Sure, and last time I met with you, I think we were going through that transition, and now the smoke is starting to clear a little bit more. So I can give you a little picture of what's happening. So, as I mentioned, the State Bar is going through a lot of structural changes, both at the level of the management as well as a reorganization or slight reorganization of the Board of Trustees. And starting with the management, if you look at your handouts, and this is the one right after all the State Bar departments. It's an org chart, about 5-6 pages in. And one of the things that's happening is the senior management of the State Bar, it has been reorganized. When Leah Wilson was the Chief Operating Officer and Elizabeth Parker was the Executive Director, Leah actually had 14 departments directly reporting to her. And if you look at the org chart, it basically, the first 2 report directly to the Board of Trustees, but from then on, there are 14 now. What happened was we created, or she created, or the management created, 3 new positions. The first one being the Chief Administrative Officer, who is Steve Mazer, who was our General Services Manager. The next one that is new is the Chief Program Officer, which as you see has 6 departments underneath that person, and we are actually in the process of interviewing for that position. And then the other new position is the Chief of Mission, I want to say mission completion, mission advancement and accountability, which is Donna's position. So you can pen Donna in there. And I know it's going to be soon Chief of Mission Accomplishment, because she will complete, or completion, because she will complete all these. But in her charge are 3 of the departments. So now, instead of having 14 departments reporting to the Executive Director, or at that point, the Chief Operating Officer, now there will only be 5 people directly reporting, which makes it a little more manageable. And of course, we did away with the Chief Operating Officer. So a little bit of restructuring. The reason that this is significant to us is that COAF is staffed by the Office of Legal Services, which is underneath the Chief Programs Officer. Okay, so that's where our council right now is being housed. And as you can see, the Chief Programs Officer has a pretty daunting task of not only overseeing legal services, which is a pretty substantial department, but also admissions, which is a huge department, as well as 4 other entities. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a view of what's happening with senior management. And this matches up in terms of the Chief Programs Officer, actually matches up with the slightly restructured Board of Trustees. So the Board of Trustees also had a number of different committees on the Board of Trustees level. Our COAF used to report to the Stakeholders Committee, which is no longer. So Stakeholders has been merged with Admissions and Education, and again, you see admissions kind of being merged. And what's come out of that is a new committee called the Program Committee, or Programs Committee, or PROCOM as we call it in BARS. All right, so what happens is Chief Program Officer, all of their charges and their departments now match up with the Board of Trustees Program Committee. I know, it's like, okay, what does that mean to us? Well, this is what it means to us. Not only will we have a new senior manager overseeing us, but also the Programs Committee of the Board of Trustees has been asked to take a closer look at all of the State Bar sub-entities. And COAF is one of those sub-entities. Another sub-entity is the California Commission on Access to Justice, the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission, the Committee of Bar Examiners. So all of the basic volunteer committees are considered sub-entities. So if you look at the next page, and don't try to read it because I'm not going to pay your optometry bill or ophthalmologist bill. But this is what's happening. So the program committee working group has been charged with looking at all of the sub-entities and trying to do a couple of things. So I know you can't read this because it's too small, but in the first line below the gray bar, the next line is where we fall. And if you flip to the next page, which is a little bigger font, and it says Programs Committee Working Group Reviews, this is what's happening on that line. Okay, so if you look at the next page, and what's happening, the program committee is being charged with taking a look at all the sub-entities and figuring out these first three tasks. Now, for the COAC, as well as the California Commission on Access to Justice, as well as with the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission, all of these being staffed by the Office of Legal Services, we are overseen or being looked at by two Board of Trustee members, Mark Broughton and Hyland Chin. And so it's great to have Hyland here because she can see what her charge is going to be. And so every State Bar entity is being asked to be looked at by the Board of Trustees member assigned to them, and these 1 through 3 at the top are what the Board of Trustees are looking at. One, does the Board of, so that the Board of Trustee understands what each sub-entity does. So it's no longer we do what we want to do in isolation and simply report back to the board, and hopefully we don't cross any lines or do something that's wrong. Now, the Board of Trustees wants to see what the sub-entities do and try to understand it, okay? And then we want to make sure that they have all the information they need to oversee our sub-entities and evaluate adequately the effectiveness of what we do. So as I mentioned before, through our budget process, they want to see if what we're saying that we're going to do, are we doing it, and how are we doing it, okay? And we've already had an orientation for our trustees, including Jason, so they got a pretty good orientation. The same orientation that you as new members get coming on to the council, and so they at least have the basics of what the COAF is doing. And then number 3, focus the sub-entities on the policy-making role, and then segregate out the administrative work to staff. So we want to make sure that you're doing what you're good at doing, which is providing the expertise and making the policies, and then as staff, we'll do the work, along with you, of course, to get the work done, okay? Now, the next 5 points are specific to the 3 entities that I mentioned, including COAC. Okay, so it gets a little bit more into detail. So number 1, how do we best define the Board of Trustees' role in informing, supporting, and directing diversity and inclusion and access to justice work through the 3 entities? So now what we're seeing is, again, with the new mission statement, we're trying to integrate. We're trying to integrate the work of the Board of Trustees with the 3 entities, as well as within the staff of the State Bar. A lot of it goes back to the mission statement that Jason read. And as pointed out before, COAF was kind of a standalone entity. Now we're trying to integrate it within the workings of the bar and seeing how we can get the Board of Trustees to work with us. Number 2, should access to justice and diversity, inclusion goals and objectives be integrated into all aspects of the State Bar public protection programmatic work plans? I think that's a definitive yes. But the next question is, if so, how do we do this? I think this is what we really need to think about. And one of the challenges here is something that I mentioned at the last meeting. We have public protection defined somehow, and it's easily defined when we think of admissions. It's easily defined when we think of our Office of Trial Counsel, the enforcement, the ethics part of it. but it's a little harder to define, not only because we've not tried to do it yet, but it's not as obvious it's not as easy to articulate. I think all of us here know in our gut that it is part of public protection, but we're gonna have to be able to articulate it to the public and to all the other stakeholders, including people on the Board of Trustees, folks who really don't understand the type of work that we're doing. We're gonna need to connect it to public protection. And of course, we're gonna need to share that with the public. And the final arbitrator of all this, I think, are the folks up in Sacramento, the legislators who decide our fee bill every year. And one of the things that we have found is that it's not as obvious to the folks in Sacramento what public protection is and what access and inclusion are. So again, I think that's something that this group, we should be thinking about in terms of articulating it and how we can prove it or show it or whatever, how we're gonna do it. Okay, moving on, number 3. Are the sub-entities structured in a way that allows for oversight without conflicts of interest? I'm going to stop right there because this doesn't pertain as much to COAF as it does to one of our other entities, which is the Access to Justice Commission. It's a little different from COAF. COAF, all the members here are appointed by the Board of Trustees. It's pretty clear that we are an entity with oversight by the Board of Trustees. The council, the Access to Justice Commission, actually has 10 Board of Trustees appointees and 16 external entity appointees. So the oversight issue is a little more difficult. And I'm not going to get into it deeply here. Number 4, should all functions currently covered by these sub-entities fall under a single sub-entity? And I think Jason has answered that already. And I think one of the things there is at the Board of Trustees level, we're looking at seeing whether or not sub-entities do overlap in their work. And secondly, can we combine sub-entities to make it more streamlined? And one of the things that the Board of Trustees did, there currently is a committee, those of you who are in legal services, there's a committee called Scuttles, which is the Standing Committee on the Delivery of Legal Services. The Board of Trustees found that their work was somewhat integrated, or should be integrated within the work of the Access Commission. And so Scuttles actually will be sunsetted at the end of this year. So that's an example of how the board is combining when the work overlaps. But I think that we've seen that a lot of the work that this group is doing is very distinct. But I can't make a ruling until the Board of Trustees makes that ruling, so I don't want to take that power away. But anyway, something to think about as we move forward. Number 5, are state bar rules and policies being followed by these sub-entities? Obviously, you folks know about Bagley King. We're following it right now. And for the record, we are being webcast, hi folks. And so we are following the regulations and policies of the State Bar and the Board of Trustees. So that one, don't worry about so much. Obviously, there might be other entities that aren't as towing the line. But anyway, this is something that's going to be happening this year as we move forward. And I just want to make folks aware that we're doing this. Now, as I look around the room, as I talked about this, I see faces that look a little scared and frightful. And it could be interpreted that way if we had anything to hide, or we think that, wow, we're not doing anything. I wouldn't be concerned. I'm looking at this as a very positive thing. I'm looking at this as a chance for us to show the Board of Trustees and the rest of the State Bar all the good things that we've done, all the good things that we're currently doing, and all the good things that we will do in the future. And this is a better integration so that we can work with the State Bar and the Board of Trustees and hopefully spread the work of this council to the entire profession. So again, I look at this as a very positive thing. I think as we work closer with our Board of Trustees liaisons and folks, I think we'll see that it's actually going to be a very positive, productive thing that we're doing.
Ron, may I add something?
Sure.
So one of the other important pieces of this review that's going on that we lovingly refer to among State Bar staff is the Appendix I review, because it emanated from Appendix I of the 2017 Governance in the Public Interest Task Force. The section related to these access to justice committees is in your materials. But one of the other reasons for looking at the committees is also to assess whether the Board of Trustees has the appropriate level of engagement with each of these sub-entities. And so in some instances, the study may conclude, yes, the board has the appropriate level of engagement, and other instances it may be no, the board needs to be more engaged or potentially less engaged in some of those sub-entities. But I think that's an important piece of this discussion, and I think that goes to what Rod was saying about making sure that we have the right focus on these important issues. So I also look at it as sort of a positive opportunity to make sure that everybody is engaged in this to the appropriate level, and it's also intended to say, we take a lot of your time and a lot of your effort, and we want to make sure that your efforts are focused on the high-level policy decisions. Is there administrative work that the committee is doing that would better and more effective and efficiently be done by staff and taken out of the hands of the committee? So we're looking at those things as well to make sure that we are using your valuable time to its best and highest purposes.
And to follow up on all this, one thing that when we created COAP, it was created very carefully. Judge Brenda knows, and Ron and Judge Holly, because of the way the transition evolved from going from 5 separate access and fairness committees to one entity, which would then engage at a higher level and review and implement all the initiatives that needed to be implemented to address diversity and inclusion in the legal profession. It gave us that opportunity, and COAP has proven to live up to that expectation in terms of being a think tank and creating and developing new initiatives at a higher level. One thing that we have always done with COAP, which may not have existed with other entities, is COAP has never hid anything. We've always been very careful to report to the board. We've always been very careful to propose our strategic initiatives and plans for approval by the board. So everything we do has been approved by the board. So the board has always been aware of what we're doing and has had the opportunity to provide input and to engage at various levels depending on what these initiatives are. One thing we haven't had the opportunity to do in the prior years leading up to the new focus of the current administration is that we've been kept from the board. We haven't had that opportunity, so we welcome at this point greater opportunity at more intervals during the board operations and so forth to check in with the board, to let the board know what we're doing, not go just once a year to elaborate on what's been happening and what we plan to do. In the original document when Karen Nobumoto was president of the State Bar, she was the first one to push the heavy emphasis on diversity throughout the bar and the heavy role of the Board of Trustees and the State Bar President in terms of providing a voting pulpit and for each board member to go out and educate the profession and the community and the public on the importance of diversity and inclusion, depending on where your offices were, where you participated in the legal profession and so forth. So those things all need to come into play as well, so that it doesn't always just fall on COAP to try to be the advocate. Because we had a lot of pressure on us when the board was going through the whole governance issues, and we had to testify before the governance task force to make it clear how diversity and inclusion was an integral part of public protection. So we're going to have to revive all of that and put that, articulate that in writing so that we can again begin to put that out so everybody really clearly understands that public protection definitely includes the whole concept of diversity.
I just wanted to add that Donna referred to Appendix I, and that is right after this page, so if you care to look at it, those are some of the things that the Board of Trustees will be looking at.
And so I was reading Appendix 9, there was a great discussion about whether to merge COAF with other commissions. And there was a discussion there about creating additional seats for the CCAG, but is there a possible discussion to expand the number of seats on COAF, or will it be the same moving forward?
I think all of these are to be determined, and depending upon what the Board of Trustees or the program committee thinks. So something to think about here, because it might be some issue that you may want to raise in the future if you think that's needed.
Hi, Rod. I see on page I-11 of the handout, Appendix I, so at the very end it says recommendation referred to the SSNA committee. What's the SSNA committee?
Oh, that's the stakeholders committee that was in existence before, that has since been merged with another committee to create this new program committee. So where you see SSNA, just put ProCom.
But, so, okay.
And the study that it says, refer to the committee for further study, this is the study that we're talking about now.
What is the study that we're talking about now? Oh, I'm sorry, I have to identify myself for the record. Kathy Malzahn. Okay, well, what is the study that we're talking about now?
The one that's on the chart that I showed you and that I just went over, the 8 points.
I'm sorry if I sound confused, but is anybody from COAF going to be doing this? Studying whether or not we should merge? I mean, if I'm reading this appendix correctly, I'm happy to see that although many other things have closed, I mean, closed, you know, reading through this, we're not closed. And there's a lot of really good ideas in here about things that we can think about, or, you know, in order to make it, as you're saying, have the Board of Trustees understand what we do and all that. But I'm a little unclear on the process. I heard you say it at the beginning when you were outlining the changes that are happening at the State Bar. So I guess my question is, this SSNA committee for further study, will any of us be on that committee?
Okay, so again, the SSNA committee is now the program committee. And in terms of how this is going to work, it's going to really depend on the program committee and our two liaisons from the program committee, Mark Broughton and Highland Chen, in terms of how they want to conduct their study and their research, which you're referring to. First of all, staff is definitely part of the discussion here. So Pat will be in the discussions, I will be in the discussions. But for each of the sub-entities here, including the ones beyond us, the other dozen or so other sub-entities, they've been broken down into different groups. And again, you know, we have the liaisons that we have. And each group is going to look at and do their study however they decide fit. So to answer your question, it really will depend on how Mark and Highland decide they want to go forward with their study. Staff, again, has provided them and will be providing them with as much information as possible. And I would hope that a major decision of reorganizing or doing something like that would be discussed with all the information rather than done behind closed doors.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Highland Chen, and with Mark Broughton, we are the liaisons for this sort of program review. And we will definitely be engaged in a process of information gathering, talking to all of you, understanding the work of COAF, and absolutely will not be engaged in doing any sort of reorganization without discussion and input. And I am very excited about the initiative to integrate more diversity and inclusion into all aspects of what the State Bar is doing.
Thank you. And I want to apologize for if I'm I may rush people along a little bit, because we do have to get out of here by 4 o'clock, so we don't run into those hordes of people from UCLA and USC. We don't want to hang around with that riffraff. All right, so let's move on to liaison updates. Let's start with Ruby on the California Law Academy Support Council.
Okay, I just came off mute, so it took me a little while. What am I supposed to talk about?
About California Law Academy Support Council. As long as you're talking, why don't you give our update on the ABA?
Okay, starting with class, the California Law Academy Support Council, we had our annual Summer Institute on June 15 and 16, or 14 and 15, two of those 3 days, one of those days. This year at the State Farm, we've had it now for 7 years in a row since we started our Law Academy, and had quite a good attendance. I was not there, actually. Pat was there. Les Winter was there. Emily, I think you were there.
Yes, I was.
And they had a wonderful day of professional development on the first day with Fred Galvez teaching our teachers how to teach group law for 4 hours. Then we had an hour from a professor from UC Davis to talk about immigration, and then a professor from University of San Francisco to talk about constitutional First Amendment rights. The second day, of course, we had our panel that talked to issues that the Law Academy Teachers and Advisory Council had come up through the year and that we needed to talk about. And of course, an update on the California Department of Education. The California Law Academy Advisory Council is going strong. Pat and I were both in that last meeting on Monday, and the next upcoming Educating for Careers Conference coming up in March in Sacramento. The biggest news, I guess, we've added quite a few law academies this year. We just added 2 in Riverside County. I went down and started creation of their first advisory council. That was for North High School in the Riverside Unified School District and Valley View High School in the Moreno Unified School District. We also started our first law academy in the East Bay, Oakland Tech High School in their first law academy.
Bulldogs!
Holly is a proud alumni.
As is Pat, yes.
Yes.
You can say that diversity was started.
He was they produced.
Brenda's putting her
Okay, I gotta get McClymonds in. The Warriors always beat the Bulldogs.
Everybody always beat the Bulldogs. Sorry.
Okay, so the challenge is there to get that high school to be one of our law academies. So, Brenda and Ron, are you going to accept that challenge?
Yeah, of course.
We can add you next year. We also added 2 in Santa Ana, I think, since our last report, or I may have reported on this already, but we added 2 due to the help of Emily, who very much helped us with starting the San Juan Capistrano Hills High School, and then we also started Santa Ana High School at the beginning of this last school year. So we're now up to 22. We've got 20 who are active. 2, the ones in Riverside and Moreno Valley, will go live next August, and we are in the process of putting together the teaching teams. We're working with them on curriculum, and we've already formed their advisory council. So I think that's the update on California Law Academy. We sent out from COAP, we sent out the information about the essay contest, so that is now in teachers' hands. And I think, Pat, do you have anything more to add?
No, that's it.
For Emily, or Leslie, here on the line?
Emily, please.
I don't really have anything to add. It's kind of corollary to the update from California law regarding the Pathway to Law School. So I'll wait until I'm called upon.
Okay, so going on with the ABA has gone through the same sort of process change that the state bar exam going through. We did that about 5 years ago and changed our 9 goals to 4 goals. with the third goal being diversity and inclusion. This last year was my last year on the Board of Governors for the ABA, and I had the unenviable task of reviewing the diversity or the goal 3 entities to do the same thing that you're looking at, to determine whether or not these goal 3 entities, among many others, but they were one of the ones that you'll be interested in, should be merged, should be sunsetted, should be supported in the structure that it already was, and how should it continue. So we did that over this last year. It was quite, what shall I say, Pat? Quite an adventurous year. Sometimes it felt like trying to get Iran and Iraq together, but I think in the end, we came up with a structure that really worked, that I think will push the issue of and the value of diversity and inclusion far forward into the future for the ABA. For the first time, and I'll tell you that Pat and I were the ones that were, I think, the main architects of putting together the structure, although it's not known that Pat was. She was my hidden
secret weapon
helper that we couldn't let everybody know what she was working on. But we came up with a structure with the help of all the entities and with the help of a committee that's called SCOPE, the Standing Committee on Correlation of Work for the ABA, which reviews every 2 years every entity in the ABA for its efficiency and its effectiveness. It also did a review of the diversity entities. It came up with a structure that's new and that's innovative, and we hope that will include not only the diversity entities, but all the diversity entities that are in sections and divisions of the ABA. So for the first time, we have a diversity council that is made up of all the chairs of the diversity entities, including Commission on Women, including SOGI, which is a sexual orientation, gender identity, and disabilities, will sit in one room and actually talk to each other about fundamental plans, budgets, fundraising, etc. Pat has been appointed as the new chair of this Diversity and Inclusion Center. And so she will chair not only the center, but she will chair what we also created was an advisory council. The advisory council is made up of 20 representatives from all, let me get this straight, from all the diversity committees and entities that are housed in sections or divisions of the ABA. So we looked at the litigation section, for instance, the law practice section, the solo and small practice section, and any of the sections that had a current and working diversity committee or council. We asked them to send a representative to the advisory council. We asked our 4 big divisions to send a representative to the advisory council. We also included a representative from each of the 4 ethnic national bar associations. So that's the FABA, HMBA, NBA, and the Native American Bar Association, as well as the National LGBTQ Bar Association. I think we are in the process right now, and Pat can update us on that, of adding to the National Association of Women Lawyers and possibly more. We put together a process so that any entity who feels like they really need to be part of this advisory council, they can send in a form and an application which will be reviewed by a committee to determine whether or not they will be able to join this advisory council. The advisory council will be having its first meeting. Pat will be chairing that as well as the center. So you can see that we've given her a lot of work, and we expect that she will not only keep the state bar afloat, but for the next couple of years, our diversity entities afloat. I am now the chair of the Public Education Committee, and I'll be talking a little bit. Can I just throw that in, or shall I wait for Mark?
Go ahead, Ruthie.
The civics education.
So Mark's gonna report on the new project for early education, which would be civics education. And let me just say this, that the APA will be working as well on a new civics summit, which will include, hopefully, this one, if it's in my team list, will be state school superintendents, the chief justices, the bar president-elect, and some very committed bar people who will work with other organizations, not just the law, but other organizations to create a civic summit, probably be held in Washington, D.C. And that's the project that I wanted to work with Mark on, so that California can be a star, because our law academies will be one of the programs that will be highlighted as one of the programs that is working for civics education across the nation. One of three. There's one in Ohio, one in Florida, and California Law Academy will also be highlighted. And Mark, hopefully, and Mark, if you have the time to do that, will be representing California on that.
Great. Thank you very much, Ruthie. We're going to have a report on the Judicial Council that Pat's going to present.
Okay. Kiana couldn't be here today, but she did send us very brief written reports, so I told her I would read it to you because she wants to be sure that it doesn't appear as an official report that hasn't been approved through the channels of the Judicial Council. So first of all, in terms of the Advisory Committee on Providing Access and Fairness, they will be in the process of updating a resource that was developed about 5 years ago. It's a toolkit that was sent out to the presiding judges of all the courts throughout the state of California for them to initiate local recruitment and outreach efforts for attorneys from diverse backgrounds to apply for judicial appointment. So that will be updated. They're also going to be working on recommendations regarding bias and fairness education for the branch. And this may include recommendations for improving education for judicial officers, court staff, and judicial council staff. Right now, all the judicial training is through CJER, the California Education. So we don't train judges, they train judges, that's their area. But we've been monitoring their training because we want to be sure that they're providing a sufficient implicit bias training for the judges and other judicial officers, because that ties in with the work that we do in terms of access to the courts and fairness. In terms of general education on implicit bias, which I just talked about, only a few of the Judicial Council staff have expertise, and they periodically provide education on request to the courts and other justice system partners. In the past, there was at least one person and two maybe that were dedicated to providing implicit bias training and longer term training, and then they shifted to sprinkling implicit bias among various other courses. So the reason we were concerned was we thought that the whole focus on implicit bias was being diluted and minimized. So we hope that CJER will begin to review how they provide that implicit bias training to the judges so that it's more effective and more expansive. The CJER's Judicial Branch Access, Ethics, and Fairness Division is working on a curriculum plan for 2018, which includes some work related to implicit bias. So our Judicial Committee is going to have to continue to work with Kiana to determine how much that focus will be and to what extent the implicit bias is going on. And COAP does train the Jenny Commission, but those aren't judges per se. They're not being trained because they're judges. They're being trained in terms of identifying and recognizing their own biases as they review the judicial appointments, judicial applications, to be sure that they're reviewing those and ranking them in a fair manner. So that's actually
All right, thank you. Now moving on to the section of our agenda on COAF strategic planning. We have an attached to your documents, it was a 2017 survey results and a number of demographics. So Pat, you're going to give a short commentary.
And this is here for your information. I mean, we're not going to discuss in detail. This is for every one of our committees to review these demographics because it has implications for the work that we do. Our main charge is to increase diversity in the legal profession, and we do that along the entire diversity pipeline. So these statistics will show you, not necessarily how successful we are, but what the trends are in the liquor profession in terms of demographics among the various constituent groups. This chart appears in our roadshow. This is one of the slides, PowerPoint slides, and it basically takes the data from all the State Bar member surveys, so starting in 2001, then 2006, 2011, and then the most recent 2017 survey. And you notice that it lists the percentage of each group as members of the entire State Bar, and then we reduce the numbers in parentheses are the raw numbers, so we get a feel for that. And then we compare it to the census data in terms of statewide demographics. And it's always been our goal to try to align the diversity in various areas in the state to the census demographics. And we try to break it down by county, because you can't really apply the statewide demographics to every county in the state. You can't take LA County and expect Pumas County to emulate LA County. So we break the data down by county, so that's what we use, and we send out that information to all the local minority bars when they're looking at their diversity efforts and looking at their digital presence efforts as well. This is from the 2017 survey, and it's more detailed data in terms of the demographics by constituent group. And then there are a couple of charts in here that break down the data further by demographics, by the number of years the attorneys have been in practice. And then you'll see that the trends are showing that the newer the lawyers are, greater the diversity, which is probably expected, because when you look at those that have been in for 45 years, there was very little diversity 45 years ago. But as the newer lawyers come in, there's a greater degree of diversity. But the thing that we've noticed that we're trying to, and everyone here should begin to try to identify the rationale and the reasons for this, is that even though diversity has gone up and then down and then up, the latest couple of years shows that certain groups, African American and even Asian Pacific Islanders, has gone down in terms of number and percentage of the profession. So we need to look at the reasons for that and begin to address those issues.
I was going to add that the chart that we have here, the attorneys' demographics were obtained by doing a survey of attorneys, and Pat knows the exact details of how many attorneys actually responded to it. But I mean, obviously there's a self-selection process, and the accuracy is not as high as obviously we would like. So I think it's something now that, since diversity and inclusion is part of the mission of the bar, that we may talk to those who do our research within the bar and see if we can get better data and more accurate data on this. So that's something in the works, and Donna's here and she oversees that group, so we'll see where we go with that.
Thank you. Now, Angela.
Yeah, you have a handout here on the wind tunneling process. I think the microphone. Oh, sorry. Hi, this is Angela, and this is on the wind tunneling process, the tool that we're going to use.
Closer to the
tool we're going to try to use to get more access to information beyond ourselves. We want to not be talking to ourselves. So I have teed up on my own system what the site looks like, and it's very basic, but if you all wanted to sign into it, you could see it. And what it does is it breaks it down so that you're generating ideas, and then you're seeing how other people are thinking about the questions, or not the questions, but the categories of thinking we want people to direct themselves to. So if you look at this handout on the third page, the proposed categories are there, and you can see that the areas that we're asking for people to give input in are basically assuming that we are saying clearly what our agenda is by saying that we are there to promote the diversity and inclusion aspects of our mission. And so we're not sort of entering neutral space. We're being clear. This is important and we like your thinking on it. You can disagree, and we'd like to see that too, actually. So we're okay with seeing where the blind spots are. We'd like to see where the blind spots are, and we'll probably get some enthusiastic inputs there. But at the end of the day, what we're going to be tasked with as COAF is making some decisions about what to do with the inputs that we begin seeing. And it'll be interesting because we'll be reaching beyond the people that are already in the choir. So that's going to be an important part of the marketing and outreach once this is ready to go out. But you can play around on the site right now. It's teed up and it's open until, I think that it says February 1st of next year. So you can go in there and start seeing what has been added in during this experimental phase. That's it.
And as you look at the proposed categories, this, if you recall, the last meeting in September, there were a lot more, probably twice as many categories that we had, and we were trying to figure out how we could focus. This is based on feedback since then, and giving all of our input to Jane Moran, our consultant, and she has helped us develop this language as the next step. And as you can see, we're trying to keep it short, direct to the point, and then individuals who want to participate can, as Angela said, they could put in whatever information they want. They could support it, they could oppose it, they could give additional ideas, they could give suggestions on how we can approach these various issues. But what we're trying to do is gather information and feedback from the widest possible group of individuals. We don't just want the choir to respond. We don't just want our friends to respond. We want people who don't know about the diversity, who are neutral, or maybe who are even opposed to the whole concept being incorporated into the bar. Because what happens is when they continue to go on this site, they can see comments from all the other participants. And then eventually, and Angela can describe this better than me, eventually the dialogue evolves so that everybody can understand where everybody's coming from, and you come to a different place. And that's the kind of feedback that we want to look at in terms of incorporating that into the next steps of our strategic planning process. So if you look at on this handout too, there's a timeline. So this will give you a sense of how we're going to take each step. And it's a slower timeline. We're trying to push it, but I think it's a slower timeline is better, so that we're really careful how we develop the language and the structure and the outreach for each of these steps. So by the time we come back in February, we'll have the final version. We will have gone onto the site and played around with it and be able to come back to say what still isn't working and how it could be tweaked. Then it gets put out to the list of participants that we will develop based on all your input and so forth. And then in April, the participants will have the chance to dialogue and be involved. And then in May, we will look at it and come up with a proposed revisions to our strategic plan with the hope of presenting that to the board at the July meeting.
Yeah, I have a question, Kathleen. Hi, Angela. I see the fifth proposed category is what you see as diversity versus inclusion. And I do remember we had a whole bunch more questions last time, and that it's down to these. Was there a discussion about having the word diversity defined?
And so Pat and I did talk about this. It was my idea actually, and Pat said, yeah, okay, let's think about this. Diversity and inclusion are not the same, right? And so I think, have members on even the COAF that might not be really clear about that, because we seem to use the words interchangeably. And so we haven't had that conversation as a group, so everybody who works in this capacity, because it also gets used differently in different contexts. So like, you can have, for example, a nominating committee of a bar group saying, oh, we really want diverse candidates. And then the nominating committee gets together, and the couple of diverse people in that room start looking at the process, and they are essentially, and this is actually something that's happened to a person that I know that got involved as a diverse candidate on a nominating committee of a body that wasn't very diverse, and was basically told that diversity was not a representational thing, and there were problems with each and every diverse candidate on the list. And when she tried to say, well, no, I think we need to have a deeper conversation here, they said, well, you're here. Okay, so when one person is there, that's, okay, you've got some diversity. Inclusion is, guess what, you get to talk. You don't just get invited to a dance party, you actually get to dance. Somebody asks you to. So we haven't had this conversation, I don't think. And it's something that I think the general public also doesn't understand. So it'll be interesting to see, what do people think about when they think about diversity and inclusion? Do they think of it as the same, or do they see the difference? It's like equality and equity. They're two different things.
So my question was actually about, not about that, but about defining diversity, because I know from my personal experience when I talk to people, they don't really know what diversity was. I know a long time ago when I was in law school, I was called a minority student, and to this day it doesn't offend me, although pretty soon in California, Latinos are going to be the majority. But minority is not offensive to me, but many people, some people may be offended by it. And similarly, when I say diverse to people, they don't know what I'm talking about. They don't know if that includes physically challenged people. They don't know if that includes, when I say diversity, what am I saying? And that was my question, that I don't remember if the last time we looked at all the list of these questions, if the word diversity itself was defined. That's my question, and I don't know if that's appropriate, or if this group has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing if people think we need to have that as a category, right? This was supposed to sort of get at it, I think, but maybe we need to have it as a separate category to have people have input. What do they see as diversity?
I think you should have it as a separate category because it is different. And there is a lot of confusion as to what they are. I know I just had that discussion in my own law firm.
I'm sorry, do you have a microphone?
Sorry.
I was saying, I think it should be included, the discussion of it, and I know there is a lot of confusion out there, because I just had a similar discussion in my own law firm of the difference between the two, and I felt like I was banging my head against the wall, basically.
And I think it would be really useful to have it here. At some point, at our next meeting, it would be really nice to get people in here whose work it is to look at these two concepts together. And then what does it mean here in an engaged organized bar entity? And we have people right here at SC. I had suggested Jody Armour as somebody who's really very good in this area. This is his area of work. We have others that we can pull from.
And I agree with that. Maybe at our next meeting, we should make an effort to do that, since we'll be looking at the final version of this. Because it might, it will tie into the whole discussion about the demographics. Because, and Rod could weigh in on this too, you have diversity and you have inclusion. You have minorities and other groups as members of the firm, but they're not included. So then you have the retention issues that you face. So all those things are tied in, and they're two separate concepts, they're two separate approaches. But you need both in order to achieve the kind of diversity that we want to achieve in the legal profession.
But I'm not sure, I think I would like the word diversity defined. That's what I'm getting at, not diversity and inclusion, the difference between those words. But what is diversity? I mean, seriously, what is diversity? Because when I talk to people who aren't in groups like this, they don't understand what I mean when I talk about diversity.
So you have to be,
take off my OGC hat, my public hat. This is one of my musings about this is that when you define a certain term, I think it sort of locks you down into that definition. And then when you have a definition, you sometimes don't want to stray from that. I think defining it is okay, but then you don't want to fall in love with that definition because it includes many other things that the finalists haven't been told about.
So we could just have at the top, what is diversity to you? Or when you hear the word diversity, what does that mean to you?
I think that's a good idea, but then what I'm concerned about is when you develop the definition, does that exclude others who may not have had a chance to weigh in? Or does it make you not want to deviate from the definition that you've developed?
So on it would be the third page, that last proposed category where you see as diversity versus inclusion. If I were responding to it, I feel like I would be first and foremost defining each category. So I think it's kind of included in what's already there.
Yeah, and I want to just maybe suggest this is a really good example of why we need to have that conversation here. I was just at a national conference where this diversity question, it's usually set up as diversity and meritocracy and merit, right? So when it comes to opportunities, in law school or in terms of opportunities in connection with work. So it was interesting to listen to it, to the debate. There's very strong feelings about, meritocracy versus representational diversity. And right now, I think we're struggling, or we're kind of coming to the realization, the notion of being colorblind, for example, when it comes to racial and ethnic diversity is actually very unhelpful. Because what it does is it basically takes away the reality of somebody's very existence and identity by saying, oh, I don't even know you're Asian. I don't even notice that. And I have had people say that to me. Angela, I don't even notice you're Asian. Really? I do every day. I look in the mirror. I notice you're Asian. So, I mean, this whole colorblindness thing, it's become okay to now say it's deeply offensive. So now we're kind of struggling with that because it's been in our opinions and it's been in, the public discourse, and people kind of like the idea because it's safe to say, oh, I can just go to the content of your character. Except, the data don't say that to us right now. So I think this is a real hot area, even now, especially now. So it might be good for us to have the conversation just as co-op, just as co-op.
All right, thank you very much. And Pat has something to say.
So continue to give us your suggestions, because the working group will continue to meet and refine this, so that next time you see it, we'll send it out so that you can actually play with it, go on to the site and enter your comments, and keep entering, going back and entering, because then that's what Jamie will then have a chance to evaluate and let you know what the final, at that final stage, what your feedback is, so that you can get an example of how we might be able to use that information. And then the timeline, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. The final thing we need help on is suggestions on all the categories of persons who will be invited to participate. So this is just the start of a list. We need to find out from you whatever groups you think should be invited, what networks you have, so we can contact them, so we can add to the distribution list. Because by the time we finalize this structure in February, we want to then be able to then shoot it out for the latter part of February or all of April.
One thing, I was just looking at this and I thought, I'd like to get more exposure to the non-minority bars and non-specialty bars, and that, besides to state bar members, but to law school alumni associations, to ask them to participate. That could be helpful.
Quick question just on the invitee list. Are we just focusing on people that practice in California, or can we bring in other people from other jurisdictions around the U.S., maybe even outside the U.S. that may have some thoughts on some of these things, to get more input, variety?
I don't know. I would think we want to concentrate on California, because California lawyers is sort of our audience. But I don't think it would be a bad thing to draw in other people. I would like go to an international association of such and such lawyers or whatever, because if the majority of the members would not be California lawyers.
Okay.
And so I think that is sort of our homework for what we're going to be doing, is that we would like everybody to go onto the wind tunneling site and give your thoughts on it. And whether or not there, you know, there's you know, we had a long discussion last time about refinements and how it is, you know, how we each perceived it, because how we each perceive it, especially people who are newer to COAF, is very important in terms of seeing how it is that somebody who gets this just out of the blue is going to feel. If they go into it and they don't feel like it's user friendly, then they're just going to close it down. So if you you know, so any comments, positive, negative, whatever, please, if you could come back to our next meeting and share that, then that would be very helpful. So thank you for that. Speaking, oh yeah.
And any ideas for outreach to how we promote it? Because the more information that's in the promotional materials, so people will understand what it is that we're trying to achieve in it. Then when they get the invitation, that it would be something that they're aware of.
Which leads us into our next meeting. So we want everybody can please put down on your calendars all the meetings that are listed here. Boy, that was a great segue. Our next meeting is a video conference meeting. It's between San Francisco and LA offices on Saturday, March 3rd. So please put that down. You know, if you are from the LA or San Francisco areas, it's easy to go into the offices there and participate. It's a lot easier than, well, I don't know, than sitting at home in your pajamas. That might be easier. And then you have to deal with Bagley Keats, so you don't want other people in your pajamas. They may go get in their pajamas as well. I don't know. That's probably not a good idea. All right, so, and the next one is also Saturday, May 12th, 2018, also by video conference. The next one is in person. It's our Saturday, September 28th in-person meeting in Los Angeles, here in Los Angeles.
It's the 29th. Saturday is the
29th,
29th, not the 28th.
All right. Good to know we're all, yes.
Aloha from Hawaii, Ruthie. Has left the conference.
I thought she was inviting us to have our next meeting in Hawaii. All right. So Saturday, September 29th, and then again an in-person meeting, our annual planning meeting in San Francisco on November 17. Is that still correct? November 17. So yes. So put those please on your calendar now and reserve those so that we can get as many people as possible to come in person to those two in-person meetings.
Okay, will the video conference be in this room?
I believe so.
Or one of the, you know, that's because
Then
it's
they're
not
gonna
going to
be
be half as many, so it
Okay.
won't be as large a room, but it'll be on this floor.
And just one last question, if I may. The new committee will start on November 17th. I'm trying to figure out when my last meeting
Yeah,
is.
you should come to the 29th.
That's
That'll be
is
your
that the last one?
It's the last meeting of this board.
Okay, gotcha.
All right, so, let's see, so we're adjourning.
Well,
Oh.
okay, so before we
Okay,
adjourn, two A and B and F and G are set aside for your committee meetings, so the schedule of committee meetings is listed in the section right after it says lunch break. You get your lunch, take a couple minutes off, and then start at
12:25.
12:25. Okay, so that's when the first round of committee meetings will start, then you adjourn, then you do the second round. And then we come back and convene in the afternoon at 2 o'clock for the introduction of the class.
Does everybody know what committees they're on? I've talked to Ted.
You have two documents that you should be using when you go into your committee meetings. One is the breakdown of the strategic plan by committee, and then there's the Bagley team chart, and on the bag routine chart for each, it's organized by committee as well, but it lists the committee members at the beginning of each committee section.
So the first meetings are going to be early education in room 2A, in college and law school in room 2B, legal, I was going to say legal profession and not 2B, but no. Legal profession in room 2F, and judicial in room 2G. And then we'll go around and we'll tell you when we're switching over committees. Then we'll have communications in 2A, education MCLE in 2B, stakeholders newsletter in 2F, and fundraising in 2G. All right? So we are adjourned for more, oh yes.
I was passed over on the agenda regarding California law.
I'm sorry, that's what I was asking you about when you had a report.
I'm sorry.
And you said,
I'm sorry. Just very quickly, two things I want to share with you. One, our annual summit is at University of San Francisco School of Law on February 24th, and that will be statewide. And the other item I wanted to share with you is that UC Berkeley has joined as one of our Pathway partners. So we are delighted to share that information, and I'll be discussing it further within my committee. Thank you.
all right, thank you. So we are adjourned for the morning.
Please, yes.
Thank you.